I never thought a plastic ice scraper would lead to the biggest neighborhood meltdown Riverside Heights had ever seen. But when Margaret Henderson stole mine from my truck that frozen December morning, she had no idea she just picked a fight with the only person keeping her precious cul-de-sac accessible all winter long. The whole thing started on a Tuesday morning around 6, when I was loading up my plow truck to clear the subdivision streets. I lived in Riverside Heights, a cookie-cutter HOA community in Rochester, Minnesota, where the houses all looked the same shade of beige, and the rules were stricter than a military academy. I had moved there 3 years ago when I started my snow removal business, figuring it made sense to live where I worked. Big mistake, but I didn't know that yet. My name is George Thompson, and I run Thompson Snow Removal Services. I had the contract to plow every street in Riverside Heights, which included about 200 homes spread across 12 streets. The HOA paid me decent money to keep everything clear from November through March, and I took pride in my work. When it snowed, I was out there at 4 in the morning making sure people could get to work on time. That morning, about 8 inches had fallen overnight. I had already done my first pass through the neighborhood, pushing snow to the sides and making sure the main roads were passable. I parked my truck in my driveway to grab some coffee and check my equipment before doing a second, cleaner pass. My ice scraper, this heavy-duty model with a brass blade that I had owned for 15 years, was sitting on my dashboard where I always kept it. I went inside for maybe 10 minutes. When I came back out, the scraper was gone. I stood there staring at my dashboard, confused. The truck was locked, I was sure of it. Then I noticed the passenger window was open about 2 inches. I must have forgotten to roll it up all the way when I had reached over to grab my clipboard earlier. Someone had reached in and taken my scraper. I looked around the street. Most houses were still dark, people sleeping in because of the snow day. But 3 houses down, I saw Margaret Henderson standing on her porch watching me. She was the president of the Riverside Heights HOA, a 52-year-old woman with that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She wore a bright red parka and held a cup of coffee, and even from that distance, I could see the satisfied look on her face. I walked down to her house. The sidewalk was slippery and I had to watch my step. When I got to her driveway, I called out, "Margaret, you see anyone near my truck just now?" She took a slow sip of her coffee. "Good morning, George. Lovely weather we're having." "Yeah, it's great." "Someone stole my ice scraper right off my dashboard. You didn't happen to see anything?" "An ice scraper?" She raised her eyebrows like this was the most fascinating thing she had ever heard. Why would anyone want an old ice scraper? Because it's cold and they probably needed one. "Look, it's not a big deal, but if you saw someone, I'd like to know." "I've been inside all morning," she said. "Maybe you should be more careful with your belongings. This is a safe neighborhood, but we can't be responsible for people who leave valuables in plain sight." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. "It was in my locked truck." "Was it though?" She smiled, thin and cold. "Perhaps you should check your windows." I stared at her. "You took it." "Excuse me, you took my ice scraper. Why would you do that?" Margaret's expression hardened. "George, I don't appreciate accusations, especially from someone who works for this HOA. Maybe you should remember who signs your checks." "The HOA signs my checks, not you personally." "I am the HOA president, which means I have considerable influence over which contractors we hire." She set her coffee cup down on the porch railing. "And speaking of your work, I've been meaning to discuss some concerns with you." Here we go, I thought. Margaret always had concerns. In the 3 years I had lived here, she had filed complaints about my truck being too loud, my headlights being too bright when I plowed early in the morning, and the way I stacked snow at the end of her driveway. Never mind that I was doing exactly what the contract specified. She just liked to complain. "What concerns?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "The snow removal has been subpar lately. You're leaving too much snow on the streets. The piles are messy, and several residents have complained about you blocking driveways." "I don't block driveways. I push the snow to the sides like I'm supposed to. If people park on the street during a snowstorm, that's their problem, not mine." "Well, it becomes the HOA's problem when residents complain to me." She picked up her coffee again. "I'm going to recommend at the next board meeting that we review your contract. Perhaps bring in some competitive bids for next winter." My jaw clenched. "You're threatening my job because I asked about my ice scraper." "I'm doing my duty as HOA president to ensure quality services for our residents. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy day ahead." She turned and went inside, closing the door firmly behind her. I stood there in the cold for a long moment, trying to process what just happened. Then I walked back to my truck, fuming. I checked the bed and found one of my backup scrapers, a cheap plastic one that would do the job but was nowhere near as good as my old brass blade model. As I finished clearing the streets that morning, I kept thinking about Margaret's face when I confronted her. That smug expression. The way she had mentioned my windows like she knew exactly what had happened. She had definitely taken my scraper, but why? What could she possibly gain from stealing a 15-year-old ice scraper? It didn't make sense until later that day when I saw her scraping off her Mercedes in her driveway with my brass blade scraper. She was using it right there in broad daylight, not even trying to hide it. I pulled my truck over and got out. "Margaret, that's my scraper." She looked up, startled. Then her face settled back into that superior expression. "This old thing, I found it on the street this morning. Someone must have dropped it, on the street, right near my truck." "Finders keepers, George. Maybe you should be more careful with your tools. You reached into my truck and stole it. I could call the police right now." Margaret laughed, actually laughed. "And tell them what? That someone took your precious ice scraper. Do you know how ridiculous you would sound? Besides, this scraper is ancient. It's probably worth $5. It's worth $5, but you stole it anyway." "I found it," she corrected. "And I think I'll keep it. It works better than the one I had. Now, don't you have work to do? The streets won't plow themselves." She turned her back on me and continued scraping her windshield with my tool. I wanted to grab it right out of her hands, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I got back in my truck and drove home, my anger building with every passing minute. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board. It was a formal notice that they would be reviewing all vendor contracts at the next meeting, scheduled for Thursday night. The email specifically mentioned concerns about snow removal quality and professionalism. It was signed by Margaret Henderson, HOA president. I called my buddy Derek, who lived 2 streets over. He was on the HOA board, one of 5 members, and generally a reasonable guy. "Derek, what's this about reviewing my contract?" "Hey, George." "Yeah, Margaret brought it up at an emergency meeting this afternoon. She said there have been multiple complaints about your work." "What complaints? From who?" She didn't give specific names, just said several residents were unhappy. "That's garbage, Derek. I do good work and you know it." "This is personal. She stole my ice scraper this morning, and when I confronted her about it, she threatened my job." There was a pause. "She stole your ice scraper right off my dashboard, and now she's using it, completely shameless about it." Derek sighed. "George, that's pretty petty, even for Margaret. But are you sure? Like really sure it was her? I saw her with it. She claims she found it on the street, but I know she took it from my truck." "Okay, look, come to the meeting Thursday night. Bring documentation of your work, photos, whatever you have. If there really aren't any legitimate complaints, we won't terminate your contract. Margaret can't make that decision alone. She needs a board majority. Fine. I'll be there. I spent Wednesday gathering evidence. I took photos of every street I had plowed, showing the clean pavement and neat snow banks. I printed out my work logs showing every time I had cleared the neighborhood, often going above and beyond what the contract required. I even got written statements from several residents saying they were happy with my work. Thursday evening came, and I drove to the community center where the HOA held its meetings. The parking lot was already half full. These meetings usually only drew about 10 people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do, but tonight there were at least 30 residents crowding into the small conference room. Margaret stood at the front, arranging papers on a podium. She wore a navy blazer and had her hair styled perfectly. When she saw me come in, her expression tightened, but she quickly replaced it with a fake smile. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out in this cold weather. We have several important items on the agenda tonight, but I know many of you are here specifically to discuss snow removal services, so let's start there." She pulled up a presentation on the projector screen. It showed several photos of streets in the neighborhood with captions like excessive snow buildup and blocked driveway and poor clearing quality. "As you can see," Margaret continued, "our current snow removal contractor has been falling short of expectations. These photos were taken over the past 2 weeks by concerned residents who brought their complaints to me." I stood up. "Can I see those photos up close?" Margaret frowned. "This is not the comment period yet, George. I'm not commenting. I'm asking to see the evidence you're presenting against my work." Derek, sitting on the board panel, nodded. "That seems fair, Margaret. Let him look." Reluctantly, she allowed me to come forward. I examined each photo carefully. The first one showed what looked like snow buildup on a street, but when I looked closer, I could see it was actually the end of a private driveway, not the street itself. Homeowners were responsible for their own driveways. The second photo showed a blocked driveway, but I recognized that house. The owner had 3 cars parked on the street during the last snowstorm, despite the HOA rule prohibiting street parking during snow emergencies. I had pushed snow around them, as I was supposed to do. The third photo was the most interesting. It showed poor clearing quality, with strips of snow still on the pavement. But the photo was dated from 2 weeks ago, and I checked my records. That was the day my backup driver had filled in for me while I was dealing with the flu. He had done an okay job, but not up to my usual standards. I had re-cleared those streets myself the next day. "These photos are misleading," I said, turning to address the room. "The first one is a private driveway, not the street. The second one is from a house where the owner violated parking rules. And the third one was from a day when I was sick and had a substitute driver, which I then corrected the following day." Margaret's face flushed. "The point is that residents are unhappy with the service." "Which residents?" I asked. "Who filed these complaints? That information is confidential." "It's confidential." I pulled out my folder. "Because I have written statements here from 15 residents saying they're very happy with my work. Would you like me to read them?" A woman in the front row raised her hand. It was Susan Kowalski, who lived on Maple Court. "I'd like to say something. I'm one of the people Margaret claimed was complaining, but I never complained to her. George does excellent work. I specifically told Margaret last week that I was impressed with how quickly he cleared our street after that big storm." Margaret's eyes widened. "Susan, you said you were concerned about snow removal timing." "No, I said I was concerned about my elderly neighbor's driveway, which is his responsibility, not George's. You twisted my words." Another hand went up. then another. One by one, residents spoke up, saying that Margaret had either misrepresented their comments or outright lied about them, complaining. By the fifth person, Margaret's face had gone from red to pale. Derek cleared his throat. "Margaret, it seems like there might be some confusion here about the nature of these complaints." "There's no confusion," she snapped. "I know poor service when I see it, and George has been providing poor service. Plus, his attitude this week has been completely unprofessional. He's been harassing me about some ridiculous missing tool, making wild accusations." "You mean the ice scraper you stole?" The words came out before I could stop them. The room went silent. Margaret's voice turned icy. "Excuse me. You took my ice scraper from my truck Tuesday morning. Reached right through the window and stole it. And now you're using it, and when I asked for it back, you refused." "That is a lie. I found that scraper on the street." "Then you admit you have it," she faltered. "I have an ice scraper that I found. There's no way to prove it's yours." I pulled out my phone. "Actually, there is. My scraper has my initials engraved on the handle. GT. I did it myself 15 years ago with a wood-burning tool. Want me to come look at the one you've been using?" The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Derek stood up. "Okay, everyone, let's calm down. Margaret, is this true? Do you have George's ice scraper?" "I have an ice scraper with some initials on it, yes. But that doesn't mean I stole it. I found it on the ground, near my truck," I added, "after reaching through my window." "You can't prove that." "Actually," a voice called from the back, "I can." Everyone turned. A younger guy I recognized as Troy Martinez, who lived across the street from me, stood up holding his phone. "I have a Ring doorbell camera. It faces the street. I checked the footage from Tuesday morning after I heard George and Margaret arguing about this." "Margaret, you walked down to George's truck around 6:15, reached through the window, took something off the dashboard, and walked back to your house. I've got the whole thing on video." The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once, some people shocked, others angry, a few laughing. Margaret tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Derek banged a gavel on the table. "Order! Everyone, please, let's have order." When the room finally quieted down, he looked at Margaret. "Margaret, this is very serious. If you stole from a contractor, that's theft. It reflects poorly on the HOA and potentially exposes us to liability." "It's just an ice scraper," Margaret said, but her voice had lost its authority. "This is being blown completely out of proportion. You called an emergency meeting to try to fire me over fake complaints," I said. "All because I called you out for stealing. That's abuse of power." "I second that," Susan Kowalski said. "Margaret, I've lived here for 8 years, and I've watched you bully contractors, harass residents, and act like you own this neighborhood. This ice scraper thing is just the latest example. I move that we remove you as HOA president." "You can't do that," Margaret sputtered. Derek was already flipping through the HOA bylaws. "Actually, according to Article 7, Section 3, a board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the board, or by a majority vote of residents at a properly called meeting. This is a properly called meeting." Another board member, a retired accountant named Patricia Simmons, raised her hand. "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in Margaret Henderson as HOA president." "Seconded," said the board member next to her. The vote happened quickly. 4 out of 5 board members voted to remove Margaret. Only one, Margaret's friend Carol, abstained. Then Derek called for a resident vote. Out of 32 residents present, 28 voted to remove her. 3 voted against and 1 abstained. Margaret stood there, stunned, as Derek made it official. "Margaret, effective immediately, you are removed as HOA president. Please return all HOA property, including keys, documents, and access credentials, by Monday." "This is insane," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "You're removing me over an ice scraper. We're removing you for theft, lying, and abuse of power," Susan corrected. "The ice scraper was just the thing that finally exposed what you really are." Margaret grabbed her purse and coat. "Fine. You want George so badly, keep him. See how you feel when he shows up at 4 in the morning with his loud truck, when he leaves snow in front of your driveway, when he tracks salt all over the neighborhood." "He's never done any of those things," someone called out. Margaret ignored them and stormed toward the door. She stopped next to me on her way out. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I think it is," I replied. "And I want my ice scraper back." She left without another word, slamming the door behind her. The meeting continued for another hour, mostly discussing next steps and electing an interim president. Derek volunteered and was unanimously approved. Before we adjourned, he pulled me aside. "George, I'm sorry about all this." Margaret was out of line. "Thanks for backing me up in there. Your contract is solid. We'll send you a formal letter confirming that there are no issues with your work." He paused. "Are you going to press charges?" For the theft, I thought about it. Part of me wanted to, just to teach Margaret a lesson. But another part of me was tired and just wanted this whole thing to be over. "I just want my scraper back. If she returns it, we can call it even." "Fair enough. I'll make sure she knows that." I drove home that night feeling vindicated but exhausted. The whole situation had been so stupid, so unnecessary. All over a piece of plastic and metal worth maybe $5. But the next morning, I found out it wasn't over. I woke up at 4 as usual and got ready to plow. We had gotten another 3 inches overnight, nothing major but enough to need clearing. I started my truck, loaded up my gear, and began my route through the neighborhood. Everything went fine until I got to Margaret's street. Her Mercedes was parked in the driveway, and as I approached, I saw her come storming out of her house in her bathrobe and boots. She stood in the street, right in my path, arms crossed. I stopped the truck and rolled down my window. "Margaret, you need to move." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, you're not plowing this street. I live here and I don't want you here. I have a contract to plow all the streets in Riverside Heights. That includes this one. I'm invoking my rights as a homeowner to deny you access." I sighed. "That's not how it works. The HOA hired me to maintain common areas, which includes the streets. You can't block me. Watch me." We stared at each other for a long moment. Behind Margaret, I could see lights turning on in neighboring houses. People were watching. "Margaret, this is ridiculous." "I'm just trying to do my job. You humiliated me last night. You turned the entire neighborhood against me. And now you expect me to just let you plow my street like nothing happened." "I didn't turn anyone against you. You did that yourself when you stole from me and lied about it." Her face contorted with rage. "I didn't steal anything. I found that stupid scraper." "Then where is it? Derek said he'd ask you to return it." "I threw it away, in the garbage. It's gone now." Something in my chest tightened. That scraper had been with me for 15 years. It had cleared snow off vehicles in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and North Dakota. It had been a gift from my grandfather before he passed away. The initials weren't just my initials, they were his too. George Thompson Sr. "You threw it away," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes, and good riddance. Now get off my street." I put the truck in park and pulled out my phone. "Okay, you want to do this the hard way, fine." I called the Rochester police non-emergency number. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Rochester Police, how can I help you?" "Hi, I'm having an issue in my neighborhood. I'm a snow removal contractor, and a resident is physically blocking me from performing my contracted work on a public street. She's refusing to move." The dispatcher took down my information and said they'd send an officer out. I thanked them and hung up. Margaret's eyes widened. "You called the police on me. You're interfering with contracted work and blocking a public street. What did you think would happen? This is harassment. No, Margaret, this is you facing consequences for your actions." She stood there, trembling with either cold or anger or both, while we waited. Other residents started coming out of their houses, some in coats over pajamas, watching the standoff. A couple of them tried to talk to Margaret to get her to move, but she refused. A police cruiser arrived about 15 minutes later. Officer Janet Kowalski stepped out, no relation to Susan, I later learned, and assessed the situation. "Madam, I need you to step out of the street," she said to Margaret. "This man is trespassing on my property." "The street is not your property. It's a public right-of-way maintained by the HOA. Now please move to the sidewalk." "I won't. He's harassing me." Officer Kowalski's expression remained neutral. "Madam, if you don't move, I'll have to cite you for obstruction. This is your final warning." Margaret looked around at all the neighbors watching. For a moment I thought she might actually move, but then her jaw set in that stubborn way I had come to recognize. "No, I'm not moving." The officer sighed and pulled out her citation pad. "Madam, what's your name?" "Margaret Henderson." "And I want to file a complaint against George Thompson for harassment and stalking." "Stalking?" I said, incredulous. "I'm doing my job. You're targeting me. You've been targeting me all week." Officer Kowalski wrote up the citation and handed it to Margaret. "Madam, you're being cited for obstruction of a public right-of-way. You need to move now or I'll have to arrest you." That finally got through to her. Margaret snatched the citation and stalked back to her house, muttering angrily. The officer watched her go, then turned to me. "You're the contractor?" "Yes, madam. Thompson Snow Removal. I have a contract with the HOA to maintain all the streets." "Any idea what that was about?" "Long story. Short version is she stole something from me earlier this week, got removed as HOA president because of it, and now she's upset." The officer nodded slowly. "People get weird about HOAs. I'd document everything if I were you, every interaction, every conversation, just in case she escalates." "Will do, thank you for coming out." "That's what we're here for. Drive safe." She left, and I finished plowing the street, including carefully clearing Margaret's driveway approach. I wasn't going to give her any legitimate reason to complain. Over the next few days, things seemed to settle down. Margaret kept to herself, barely leaving her house. I continued plowing the neighborhood whenever it snowed, and residents went out of their way to thank me and apologize for the drama. But on Sunday morning, I woke up to find all 4 of my truck's tires slashed. I stood in my driveway, staring at the damage, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had cut deep gashes in each tire, making them completely unusable. The truck was essentially disabled. I called the police again, and this time a different officer responded. Officer Marcus Reynolds examined the tires, took photos, and asked if I had any idea who might have done it. "Probably Margaret Henderson," I said. "She lives 3 houses down. We've been having ongoing issues." "What kind of issues?" I explained everything. The stolen ice scraper, the fake complaints, the HOA meeting, the street confrontation. Officer Reynolds took notes and nodded. "That's a pretty clear pattern of escalation. Do you have any security cameras?" "No, but my neighbor Troy does. His Ring camera faces the street." We walked over to Troy's house. He was already awake, having heard the police car. When we explained what happened, his face went dark. "Let me check the footage." We crowded into his living room while he pulled up the app on his TV. The camera had a decent view of the street, including my driveway. We scrolled back to around 2 in the morning. At 2:17 a.m., a figure appeared on screen, walking down the sidewalk. They wore all black with a hood up, but the gait was familiar. The person approached my truck, looked around, then knelt by each tire in turn. Even without seeing the action clearly, it was obvious what they were doing. "Can you zoom in on the face?" Officer Reynolds asked. Troy tried, but the resolution wasn't good enough. The hood covered most of the person's features. "What about when they walk?" I suggested. "There, when they're under the streetlight." Troy backed up the footage and paused it. For just a moment, as the figure passed under the light, the hood shifted and we caught a glimpse of the face. It was Margaret. "Well, that's pretty clear," Officer Reynolds said. "Do you want to press charges?" I thought about what pressing charges would mean. Court appearances, legal fees, more drama. But then I thought about my truck, about the cost to replace 4 commercial-grade tires, about the work I couldn't do today because of her vindictiveness. "Yes, I want to press charges." "All right. I'll need you to come down to the station and file a formal report. We'll issue a warrant for her arrest." The words felt surreal. Arrest. This had all started over an ice scraper, and now Margaret was going to be arrested for criminal mischief. Officer Reynolds and I went to the station, where I spent 2 hours giving a statement and filling out paperwork. They estimated the damage to my tires at around $1,200, making it a misdemeanor charge. The officer said they'd go to Margaret's house that afternoon to arrest her. I arranged for my truck to be towed to a tire shop and borrowed my brother's pickup to finish the day's work. By the time I got back to the neighborhood that evening, everyone was talking about Margaret's arrest. Apparently, she had resisted at first, claiming she was being persecuted, that this was all a conspiracy against her. The police had to handcuff her and put her in the back of the cruiser while neighbors watched. It was the kind of scene that would be talked about for years. Derek called me that night. "George, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Not your fault. The HOA board had an emergency meeting this afternoon. We want to cover the cost of your tires. It's the least we can do after everything Margaret put you through. You don't have to do that. We want to. Consider it a goodwill gesture, and we're also discussing what to do about Margaret's house. She's been paying HOA dues, obviously, but some board members think we should pursue action to have her removed from the neighborhood entirely. Can you even do that? There are provisions in the HOA covenant about members whose behavior threatens the peace and safety of the community. It's never been invoked before, but this situation is pretty extreme. We're consulting with a lawyer." I thanked him and hung up. The whole thing felt like it had spiraled way out of control, all because of an ice scraper. Margaret made bail that night, and by Monday morning she was back home. But something had changed. She looked defeated, exhausted. The smugness was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed exhaustion. On Tuesday she came to my door. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. She stood on my porch, hands shoved in her coat pockets. "I need to talk to you. Go ahead." "Can I come in?" "No," she flinched but nodded. "Okay, that's fair." She took a breath. "I came to apologize and to try to explain." I waited. "When I saw your ice scraper in your truck that morning, I wasn't thinking straight. I was already angry because you had woken me up with your plow at 4 in the morning, and I was stressed about 100 other things, and I took it. It was stupid and petty and wrong." "Yeah, it was. And then when you confronted me about it, I panicked. I couldn't admit I'd taken it because that would make me look bad, so I doubled down. I made up the complaints about your work. I tried to get you fired. I did everything I could to make you the villain instead of admitting I was wrong. You destroyed my property, Margaret. You committed a crime. I know." Her voice cracked. "I know, and I'm so sorry." I was angry and hurt and humiliated, and I wanted to hurt you back. But I went too far. Way too far. I looked at her, this middle-aged woman who had let her need for control and pride destroy her reputation and possibly her freedom. Part of me felt angry, but another part just felt sad. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm hoping you'll consider not pressing charges. I'll pay for your tires and for your ice scraper and any other damages. I'll write a letter to the HOA apologizing for everything. I'll even move out of the neighborhood if that's what people want. I just can't have a criminal record. I work in finance and a conviction would end my career. You should have thought about that before you slashed my tires. I know, you're right. I'm not asking you to forgive me or to forget what I did. I'm just asking for a second chance, please." I stood there for a long moment, thinking. The truth was, I didn't want to go through a court case. I didn't want more drama, more meetings, more police reports. I just wanted to do my work and live my life. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But I want you to understand something, Margaret. This all happened because you couldn't admit you made a mistake. You couldn't just say, 'I'm sorry, here's your ice scraper back.' You had to turn it into this big power struggle. And you lost. Not because I'm better than you or smarter than you, but because you were wrong and you refused to acknowledge it. I know. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. You're here now asking me to drop charges, but are you actually sorry for what you did? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Both. I'm sorry I got caught, yes, because I don't want to go to jail or lose my job, but I'm also genuinely sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of this. You were just doing your job and I made your life hell because of my own issues." I believed her, which surprised me. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her voice or the way she held herself like someone who had finally stopped fighting. "Okay," I said. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay for my tires, all $1,200. You're also going to write that apology letter to the HOA and to me personally. And you're going to attend an anger management course and provide proof that you completed it." "Okay. Yes, I'll do all of that. And if you ever, and I mean ever, do anything like this again to me or anyone else in this neighborhood, I will make sure you face the maximum consequences possible. Understood? Understood. Then I'll contact the prosecutor and let them know I want to drop the charges." The relief on her face was palpable. Thank you so much, George. I promise you won't regret this." "I better not." She left, and I watched her walk back to her house. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing. The mighty HOA president brought low by her own actions. I called the prosecutor's office the next day and explained that I wanted to drop the charges. The assistant district attorney I spoke with was understanding but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate that you want to resolve this privately, but we have to consider the broader implications. Miss Henderson committed a crime. The state has an interest in pursuing this case regardless of your wishes. I understand that, but she's agreed to pay restitution and complete anger management. And honestly, I think she's learned her lesson." There was a pause. "Let me speak with my supervisor. We may be able to work out a plea agreement where she pleads guilty to a lesser charge, pays restitution, completes counseling, and the conviction gets expunged after a probationary period. Would that be acceptable to you? That sounds fair." "All right. We'll be in touch with Miss Henderson's attorney." The plea deal went through a week later. Margaret pleaded guilty to misdemeanor criminal mischief, paid $1,500 in restitution including court costs, and agreed to complete 50 hours of community service and an anger management course. If she stayed out of trouble for 2 years, the conviction would be expunged from her record. Life in Riverside Heights slowly returned to normal. Margaret kept her head down, did her community service at the local food bank, and attended her anger management classes. The HOA elected Derek as permanent president, and he proved to be fair and reasonable. Winter continued, and I kept plowing the streets. Every time it snowed, I made sure Margaret's street was cleared as professionally as every other street. No special treatment, good or bad, just doing my job. In February, I got a package in the mail. Inside was a brand new ice scraper, top of the line with an extendable handle and a brass blade. There was a note attached. "George, I know this can't replace the one I took from you, especially since it had sentimental value. But I hope you'll accept it as a small token of my genuine remorse. Thank you for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. Margaret." I stood in my driveway, holding the new scraper, thinking about everything that had happened. The theft, the lies, the escalation, the arrest. All over a simple tool. The new scraper was nice, objectively better than my old one in every way. But it wasn't my grandfather's. It didn't have the worn grip shaped by 15 years of use, or the scratches from hundreds of windshields, or the memories attached to it. Still, it was something. An acknowledgement, an attempt at making amends. I used it the next morning when I went out to plow after a fresh snowfall. It worked perfectly, clearing ice and snow with ease. And as I scraped off my windshield before starting my route, I thought about how sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they learn. Sometimes they change. But sometimes they don't. In March, as winter was winding down and the snow became less frequent, I got a call from Derek. "George, we need to talk about next year's contract." My stomach dropped. "Is there a problem?" No, nothing like that. "Actually, the board wants to offer you a raise. 20% increase over your current rate. You've been incredibly professional through all this drama with Margaret, and the residents are very happy with your work. We want to make sure you come back next winter." The relief that washed over me was almost physical. "That's very generous. Thank you. You earned it, man. I'll send over the new contract this week." As spring arrived and the last of the snow melted, I found myself reflecting on the whole bizarre situation. What had started as a simple theft had escalated into neighborhood drama, criminal charges, and a complete upheaval of the HOA leadership. All because one person couldn't admit they were wrong. I saw Margaret occasionally around the neighborhood. She always gave a small wave or nod, never trying to start a conversation but acknowledging my presence. She seemed quieter, more subdued. The fire that had driven her to steal and lie and slash tires had been extinguished, replaced by something that looked like hard-won humility. In April, Margaret put her house up for sale. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was moving to Minneapolis for a fresh start. Part of the plea agreement had been that she voluntarily give up any leadership positions in community organizations for 5 years, so there was no path back to power for her in Riverside Heights. On the day she moved out, I was outside washing my truck. The moving van pulled up and workers started loading furniture. Margaret supervised, checking items off on a clipboard. She saw me and walked over. "I'm heading out today," I heard. "Good luck in Minneapolis." "Thanks," she hesitated. "I wanted to say one more thing before I go. You were right, that day on your porch. I was sorry I got caught more than I was sorry for what I did. But these past few months, doing the community service, going to counseling, it changed something in me. I really am sorry now, not just for getting caught, but for who I was. For how I treated you and everyone else. I appreciate you saying that. And I wanted you to know the ice scraper I took from you. I lied about throwing it away. I kept it. I don't know why, just spite, I guess, but I want you to have it back." She pulled the old brass blade scraper from her coat pocket and held it out to me. It looked exactly as I remembered it, right down to the worn handle and my grandfather's initials. I took it, feeling the familiar weight in my hand. "Thank you. It's the least I could do. Take care, George." "You too, Margaret." She went back to supervising the movers, and I stood there holding both ice scrapers, old and new. The old one had history, had meaning, had a connection to my grandfather and the years I had spent building my business. The new one represented an apology, an attempt at redemption, a second chance. I decided to keep both. That summer, I expanded my business. The ordeal with Margaret had taught me something about standing up for myself and not backing down when someone tried to bully me. I bid on contracts with 3 more HOA communities in the Rochester area, and won all 3. Thompson Snow Removal Services grew from a one-man operation to a small company with 4 employees and 5 trucks. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret's attempt to destroy my business had actually made it stronger. Her fake complaints had forced me to document my work more thoroughly. Her theft and vandalism had brought the community together in support of me. And her eventual downfall had cemented my reputation as a professional who could handle adversity. In November, as the first snow of the new season began to fall, I loaded up my truck with salt, shovels, and both of my ice scrapers. Derek had already signed the new contract with the 20% raise, and I was ready for another winter. As I drove through Riverside Heights that first snowy morning, starting my route at 4 a.m., I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. New HOA president, new neighbors in Margaret's old house, new contracts, new employees. But some things stayed the same. The streets still needed plowing. The work still needed doing. And I was still there, reliable as the Minnesota winter, doing what I did best. I pulled up to the first street and engaged the plow. Snow pushed aside in clean, efficient passes. The sound of the blade scraping pavement was familiar and comforting. This was my job. This was who I was. And somewhere in Minneapolis, I hoped Margaret was finding her own way forward, learning to be someone different, someone better. She had paid her debt to society and to me. She deserved the chance to move on. As for me, I had everything I needed. 2 ice scrapers, a growing business, and a neighborhood that respected the work I did. Life was good. The snow continued to fall, and I continued to plow, one street at a time, just like I always had. The drama was over. The story had ended. All that remained was the work, steady and satisfying and mine. And sometimes, on particularly cold mornings when I pulled out the old brass blade scraper to clear my windshield, I'd think about my grandfather and how he'd probably laugh at this whole situation. He had been a practical man, not prone to drama or nonsense. He taught me to do good work, be fair with people, and stand up for myself when necessary. I'd done all 3, and somehow it had been enough. The neighborhood woke up around me as the sun rose, people emerging from their houses to find clean streets and clear driveways. A few waved their thanks. Others stopped to chat briefly, commenting on the weather or asking about my business. This was community. This was home. Imperfect, sometimes messy, occasionally dramatic, but ultimately good. And as I finished the last street and drove back to my house, I felt something close to contentment. The work was done. The neighborhood was safe. And I had both of my ice scrapers, old and new, sitting side by side on my dashboard. Sometimes life gives you second chances. Sometimes people change. And sometimes, if you're lucky, everything works out exactly the way it's supposed to. I parked my truck in the driveway and went inside to make coffee, already planning tomorrow's route. Because there would be more snow, there always was in Minnesota. And I would be ready for it, just like I always was. That's the thing about plowing snow. It's not glamorous work. It's cold and early and exhausting. But it's necessary. It's important. It keeps people safe and neighborhoods functioning, and in the end, isn't that what matters? Not the drama or the conflict or the petty theft that started it all. Just the work, done well, day after day, storm after storm. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to my grandfather, to Margaret wherever she was, to Derek and the HOA board, to all the neighbors who had supported me. Then I drank my coffee and started planning for the next snowfall, because that's what you do. You move forward. You do the work. You live your life. And you make damn sure nobody steals your ice scraper.